this video, we will examine some common mistakes that are made when making scientific illustrations. And so I pulled these figures from a very nice paper that was published recently in a very nice journal. And the figures are beautiful that they made. But I did see some mistakes that they made, and they probably made those mistakes because they didn't realize or they didn't know how to fix them. I could tell that these illustrations were made in Adobe Illustrator. I could tell because of the high quality of the illustrations. I could also tell that they were made in Adobe Illustrator because they had these mistakes, and these mistakes probably wouldn't be made in other applications. Those other applications probably would have their own set of a multitude of other mistakes that would be made. And again, these figures are beautiful that they made. They just had some mistakes. Okay, so the first very common mistake that I see when making illustrations, so they're not picking the correct stroke appearance to avoid exaggerating the noise. So let's take these traces right here. These traces probably don't have a whole lot of noise in them, but they look like they have a lot more noise than they truly do because the stroke is exaggerating the noise. Okay, let me prove this to you by this line this is a random noise line that was generated in MATLAB, and I just added an exponential curve to it. And so it just has random noise, and the width of that noise you can see is this darkened line here. That's the true actual noise. These very sharp edges look like splinters of ice that come from this line are exaggerations of the noise. Because when I zoom in, you can see the actual trace, and then you can see these exaggerated splinters. If you've ever transferred over traces, electrophysiological recordings or even optical recordings like these, you have probably ran into this problem. How do you fix it? It's very simple, super simple. First thing to avoid is using very thick lines. So in this case, if I were to just lower the intensity of the thickness of the lines, that does a dramatic help. So you notice I didn't really affect anything about the appearance of the line. It looks just as dark as it did before. It just doesn't have those sharp edges. However, if you really do want a thick line, and really even if you want the thinner lines, I would highly recommend, and you almost must do this for just the integrity of the data because this is falsely representing the data, is to go to stroke. So click on this stroke. If you do not see this this control toolbar, go up to window and then click on control. See, it disappeared there. Now I'm going to click control again. Now it appears. Click on the line, click on stroke, and then go down to this corners. If you have these sharp edges, I tell you for certain that you have the corners set on sharp edges. Anytime you're doing data traces, I highly recommend doing the round corners. So, see, now notice it completely went away. So, and an example of how this would improve the data is right up here. So here there are 4 traces of different colors. You see this trace has very sharp edges, very sharp splinters, very exaggerating that noise. But notice that these other traces don't have that splinter. Again, this is, I'm not saying this data is now wrong or false. But I don't think it would change the interpretation of that data by any means. So I don't think this is an error that needs to be fixed. It just doesn't look as good, and their data could look a lot better than this. So, okay, the other thing, this is very minor, but it just kind of gets me. If you look at these lines, if I zoom in really well, this is a thick line, this is a much thinner line, and these are really thick lines. And if you even look at the individual lines themselves, they vary in thickness. How does that happen? What's going on there? Well, let me give you an example. So I'm going to draw a line just like that. Actually, and I can actually get the exact color of that line, by the way. Click the I key, and I click on this. Now it's going to disappear, but don't worry, it's still there. I just need to reverse that, and now it's the blue color. You can't really see it, but there we go. So let me show you what's going on here. So I'm going to copy this line, hold Alt, drag it over, hold Alt, click and with my left mouse button and drag. And now I have 2 lines. And then I'm going to click S, which stands for scale, and then press enter. And then I'm going to get the scaling. See, it says scale at the top, scale menu bar. And I'm going to make sure that this scale corners and scale strokes and effects is clicked. Click OK. So I'm going to click on the selection tool. I'm going to select both these objects. That's only true if you're scaling multiple objects simultaneously or multiple lines simultaneously. If you scale a single object, it would need to be like a rectangle, a triangle, or something like that. But usually it's a group of objects. Now I'm going to hold the shift key and I see that little arrow that's showing up. Now I'm going to click and drag, and what's going to happen is I'm scaling these objects, and I click scale strokes and effects, and so those lines get thicker. So that is most definitely what has happened here. Is this investigator, what probably did is he probably shrink them like that. And now notice how they're much thinner now. So, I mean, this person made no indication that this is actual real data. So I don't think he did anything fishy here. This person just was drawing this illustration and didn't realize that they were scaling down, they were changing the strokes and effects. How would you quickly create this image without changing the line thickness? So I'm going to drag this over here. I'm going to copy them. Let's just copy them. I'm always holding the Alt key when I'm copying. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these objects, click S and enter, and then I'm going to unclick these scale strokes and corners and scale strokes and effects. Now once I click these, from this point forward it's not going to scale strokes and effects. Now I can stretch these all I want. See, like this would have made these really fat, really wide, and this would have made them really narrow. So now it's not scaling the strokes and effects. So let me talk about an instance where you will want to scale strokes and effects. So take a look here. You have these really very nicely drawn electrodes. In fact, if you look at other illustrations, they look very pretty. But here, they're really fat and the lines are thick and you can hardly make anything out. And then look at this one. There's a line here, and then this triangle kind of sticks out of that edge a little, that line a little bit. It's really hard to make anything out here. So I've reproduced that electrode, but I want to show you how this, although looks nice, now can look very ugly really quick. So I'm going to click S and enter. Make sure I don't click scale strokes and effects or corners. Click OK. Now, when I reduce this in size, I'll hold shift and drag, bring it down to something much smaller. Now look at it. You can hardly make anything out of it. Now if I were to come back, now notice that I'm not scaling strokes and effects. So that's what's happening. I have a much smaller object here, and so those lines, there's the same thickness, but the size of the object is smaller. So it just looks very ugly. It just doesn't look very nice. Now the same thing would happen if I were to expand it. See, now it's really thin. This case, I really click S and enter. I really want to scale the strokes and effects because I like the thickness of the line relative to the drawing, not relative to the whole image, like the whole figure. So now if I were to scale it, see, it keeps the proportion wise. So that's a very important thing. Anytime you have most drawings that you make, if you're expanding those drawings or compressing them, you're going to want to scale the strokes and effects. All right, the last thing is the Y and X axis tick marks are pointing inward. Now, I saw several of their other illustrations where they're pointing outward, which I prefer outward. Okay, so let me just draw really quickly this axis. Now, let's recreate what they have here, which is drawn on the inside. Okay. Chances are, whenever you import this figure into Adobe Illustrator, you're going to have a line right at 0 as well as all the way to the top. Okay, so now I have this situation here. How do I fix it? Well, I select all of these lines, hold the Shift key, deselect the X-axis. So notice now I only have the Y-axis and its tick marks selected. Okay, now this is important. I'm going to, with my left mouse button, I'm going to click again on the Y-axis. See how it turned blue? That turns it into a key object. That means whatever alignment I do, I'm going to make it relative to this line right here. So this is blue, so that's going to be in line. And I can confirm that because there's a little key right there saying I'm aligned to key object. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to align to the right. What that means, it's going to take all the objects and it's going to take its rightmost point and line it up with this object, with the rightmost point of this object. When I click on this, boom, it moves those tick marks on the outside. And then if I had numbers, I would select those numbers and I would drag the numbers out. Okay, so that's how you do that. Now I'm going to create the X-axis. Alright, so I have the horizontal axis, same thing I would have done before, but I want to talk about something else. Okay, if you look, this 60 is not aligned with that tick mark. This 50 not aligned with that tick mark. The only thing that's aligned is this 0. And I know exactly why that happened. I'm going to do 0, and that's going to be the first line. That's going to be the first thing. Make this to be Arial, why not? I'm going to make this in center aligned. That's the key, center align. If you want your objects to be aligned center like you would for tick marks, you do center align. And let's do, now why is that important? Because if I press 10, look, it's still aligned. 20, it's still aligned. Now let me do over here, I'm going to do left align and center it by eyeballing. Is it? Oh, that looks pretty good right there. Oh, look at that. I'm really good at aligning things. So now if I type in 3, look what happened. It's off-centered. It'd really be off-centered. So, but if I have it centered align, I can type 1,000,000 numbers in there, and the center of that number, it will always be where that tick mark is. That's not what caused their misalignment. They made their text bigger, and it looks great, except it's not aligned. On the X-axis, you want to align on the right. And notice how it moves the text over. That's okay, you just move it back. Not a big deal. Here, this one, I'm going to make it center aligned just to show you the problem. I'm just going to select all of these objects, click on this because that's where I want to align to, and then I'm going to do right align. Right aligned. You want to do right align when you're doing the X-axis, okay, or the Y-axis. Right aligned. You want it over here. If you had the numbers on the right hand side, you would align it towards the left. If you have it on the bottom, you're going to align it towards the center. Keep that in mind. All right, so here, let's say I want 30 or 0. Big number. This will always be left aligned or right aligned. Okay, just like this is always going to be left in the center, this is always going to be right aligned. The reason why it's always going to be right aligned is because you align things here, but that's really not what matters because that's not going to keep the alignment. It's the text alignment right there. That's what's keeping these things aligned. Okay, that is some of the major mistakes that I've seen in a paper. And again, these were beautiful illustrations throughout the entire paper. Even the ones I'm showing here I think look really nice. There were just some minor things that I wanted to address so that you don't make some of the same mistakes. And so again, just review real quick. Rounded corners when you're doing electrophysiological data or imaging data, be sure to not scale the strokes and effects whenever you want to keep the lines the same thickness. And be sure to scale strokes and effects if you're scaling artwork, and center align and right align for y-axis, center align for x-axis, and the tick marks, you use the right align for the x-axis, and in this one you would say, so let me move this here, hold shift, click on that, and then I'm going to click again so it's blue, do the bottom align, see this, moves the tick marks inside. So line to the bottom, moves the tick marks to the inside, line to the top, moves the tick marks outside.